Stronger, fairer, slower.
I don't think I... That one's good.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan we should put on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift. Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Andy.
Roger.
How you doing?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. I had an interesting encounter and a bit of a story for you, and it takes us back to our favourite location. You want to guess what that is?
The hotel where we met the Trump stripper fan.
That makes it sound like we were in a more precarious situation than we actually were in, because we weren't in a hotel room with that stripper. Yeah, just for clarifying for anyone. Okay.
Well, and just to be clear, we don't know that she was a stripper. She just had stripper vibes.
Oh, I wouldn't go that far. 99% sure. Now, anyway, let's get back on track.
But that's not where you were, though, right?
No, our favorite place is the corporate workplace bathrooms. I'm going to take you back there. It's not actually a work story, but someone, one of our regulars actually approached me, and they told me of a unique situation they found themselves in a Westfield. All right, this was Parramatta Westfield, for those that are in Sydney, a very big shopping centre. And they had to go to the toilet, and they were in the cubicle doing their business, sitting down, doing a number two. And, you know, you're sitting down there, your pants around your ankles, and somewhere along the journey, he saw a little, like, some kind of noise or scratchings on the floor. And then he just kind of ignored it. But then slowly he saw this, like, shadow out of the corner of his eyes. And then he proceeded to see a hand reach down from underneath the gap on the floor of the stall, reach towards his pants. And before he could work out what was happening and cry out, the hand snatched the wallet out of the back pocket of his trousers that was falling down, and then bolted out. And he was just like, what just happened? And he's on the toilet. He hasn't wiped or anything, and he just heard
it's
just
the
running.
Perfect crime.
And I just thought, it's the perfect crime. And actually, I have a story that triggered a memory for me, because this used to be a much more popular tactic. When I remember when I was growing up, I was just a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old. This happened to my dad, right, at a shopping centre toilet. So he was in their stall, he was going to the toilet, and he saw a hand come across. But he noticed it as soon as it came, and he stepped on the hand. So he stepped on the hand, and then the guy obviously tried to run out, and my dad proceeded just to literally pull up his pants and chase him down the shopping mall. And can you think of anything more fucking terrifying than this middle-aged Asian man with shit all over his ass, running you down in the shopping mall? And I just thought, I haven't thought about that story for, decades, because it used to be a thing, apparently, that you had to be careful, and you just have to be careful about your wallet, because there's nothing much you can do if they take it and you're still in the toilet. It wouldn't work these days because, no one carries wallets anymore. Well, lots of people don't carry wallets. I don't carry wallets, so that tactic wouldn't work on me. But anyway.
You almost had me shocked at the notion of a shopping centre number two. Is this really a thing? Are people doing this in shopping centres?
Yes, 100%. You can hear it.
Can't you just wait? Can't people just
I think people like it.
No.
There's a certain person that likes it because they think they're not messing up their toilet. And trust me, they're making a mess. Come on, because when you go into a stall or something, it's disgusting. And it's not just we everywhere.
All right, but that's why you don't want to do the number two in the shopping centre bathroom.
Oh, yeah, I'm not arguing about that.
It's almost like you have to have so little self-respect to subject that to you, that the value of not having to clean your bathroom at home
and the free toilet paper
is
the free two-ply
is worth more to you than your dignity.
Yeah, but Andy, you also don't want to be like the character Shitbreak on American Pie and only be able to go to number two in your own house and have to make a round trip every day from your work or school to that's not ideal either.
Okay, but like, I remember, just to add to, a chapter to the shopping centre toilet, book of feuds. I remember when I was at uni and at school and stuff, I worked in retail. And for me, the idea of like, going to the bathroom while you're at work is like a bit weird in general, especially when you're in the shopping centre complex, right? But there were some colleagues who would always say, I'm going to 2M. And that was code for, I'm about to spend 25 minutes off the floor taking a dump in the least used bathroom in the whole shopping centre.
Oh, that
remains clean. Like so it's like a specific bathroom in the shopping centre that doesn't get used very much.
It's the employee life hack.
And it would just be like, just go to 2M. I'll see you in half an hour. And
I'm all for it, man.
It was the thing.
But I mean, hats off to this particular toilet stall bandit, because I think that is actually quite ingenious. That takes a level of IQ that I wish they applied in a more productive way.
All right. Well, speaking of toilets and the gutter, let's go to Australian politics.
Oh. All right. So we thought we're just about to head into the election. It's just been called. What is it, 2nd of May? I think it's 3rd of May.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
It'll be a Saturday as we have elections in Australia.
So that means we have approximately 5-week campaign.
Only a 5-week campaign? Feels like we've been in campaign mode for some time now.
But I mean, we must admit that's shorter than a lot of countries. But
yeah, but it's not really a 5-week campaign, though. Let's be clear.
Yeah, I know. So look, we thought today we would start off a little bit of a focus on the election and Australian politics, and starting with, I think we've both prepared 3 slightly more rapid fire questions or things that we've gathered from different sources or listeners around the election to kind of dip our toe into this topic. All right. So
before we continue, let's just give like the quick cheat sheet of this Australian election before, we start, so that anyone from outside Australia kind of knows what we're talking about. So we've got 2 leaders. We've got the incumbent Anthony Albanese, who's a first-term Prime Minister. He's the leader of the Labor Party, which is sort of, the left-leaning side of Australian politics.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been in government for 3 years, and they're going up for re-election. So first term
we have
government,
3-year terms.
3-year terms, yeah. On the other side, you've got a guy called Peter Dutton, and he's a member of what's called the Liberal National Party, because he's from Queensland, and that's what they call it in Queensland. But it's actually called collectively the Coalition, because in Australia you have the Liberal Party and the National Party. So the Liberal Party is sort of an inner city, sort of, not so much inner city, but, kind of like a Tory equivalent of the Tory Party.
Yeah.
And you have the National Party, who's like a country party, like they're for, and
regional areas.
Yeah, exactly. And they're in coalition, and they usually, when they're in government, they're in government in the form of a coalition. So you have this and they're called the Liberal Party, but it's like, they're not sort of liberal in the way that, Americans would say.
Correct.
You're liberal. So it's this like slight weird or oddity.
Yeah. So Labor Party, Democrats, and the coalition, more like the Republicans. And then we have this little thing to the side, the Greens.
Oh, yeah. And we should also say we've also got a lot of independents now, a lot more independents than we have had historically. So, if you include the Greens in that as well. But so that's where we're at. So, all right, let me start off with one for you. Is Peter Dutton Lord Voldemort?
See, we were just talking about the other episode about ugly people, right? And I do think this one is a tricky area. He definitely looks like that. I can see the similarities. Definitely, if this dude was at a jumbotron in an American baseball game, I wouldn't be surprised if he got done dirty. But look, I mean, also don't know when I look at Peter Dutton, I don't know whether to respect some kind of like alopecia condition going on, because he doesn't have like eyebrows either, right? He's very hairless everywhere. Does he actually suffer from some kind of condition?
I think he does, but I must admit.
Yeah, so that takes all the fun out of it, right? It's like, giving someone shtick and you find out they have Downs or something. You just feel like a prick. right? So I want to clarify that first, but absolutely, he's given off Voldemort vibes. Yeah.
So that's a yes. So okay, but like, there's the superficial looks like. I mean, I actually should say this. I'm not really a Harry Potter person, but like,
oh really?
He's
that's
like,
hard to imagine.
Lord Voldemort. He's like the bad guy, right?
Yeah. He's like the master evil sorcerer.
Yeah. All right. So, what about that angle? Like, is he? Because that's really the heart of the question. Is he a bad guy? Is he the bad guy in this campaign?
I think that he's always held a place of being, like a stern, authoritarian ex-copper, kind of hard on, hawkish on immigration and enforcement and things like that. So that's the kind of role he's played, right? And that's his brand, and for better or for worse, that's kind of how the media has portrayed him. I don't particularly think it's fair, but I mean, you've also got to be judged on what your media airtime is, right? And what role you can play within the cabinet.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, what else do we have to judge? What else does the public have to judge him on? He's not, climbing into a firefighter's suit like Tony Abbott, or eating an onion live on TV, or what else does the public have to cling on to?
Can we just like get off the table that he is not a particularly charismatic, inspirational leader, right? So let's just knock that out the water. Like, there's no, someone like a Margaret Thatcher, for example, or like
the charm factor's low. Like,
you can hate her guts. Like, she's for many the most hated politician in the UK, or of living memory in the UK. But for others, she's the most loved, figure in UK politics. But like, no one, no matter what your view, could say she was boring or uninteresting or whatever. And I think, I don't know whether it's by design or just, maybe innate to his character, but like, there's nothing like, there's nothing about him that cuts through in terms of, oh yeah, this guy's like really resonating with me. But what I would say is that I think in some ways the fact that he can portray just like the ordinary bloke who is just so like not like just so uninteresting, almost like whether that's an asset for him, that can resonate with people in that they don't want like a Malcolm Turnbull who everyone perceives as like just elitist and like talks, is arrogant, or could, be seen to be, even if he's not, but could be seen to be talking down to people. This guy's just like, hey, like he's he's rich, but like he did it by buying like investment properties and negative gearing, like everyone, like we're supposed to,
Yeah. I just wonder, definitely, I think that he plays this role, like the positioning for him is that he is, when they say the adults are in charge, he comes across as like the adult, right? He is serious. He does, and that you can also change that up for he doesn't have good chat, or he doesn't joke around, or he's not the most enigmatic person, right? But he seems like a safe pair of hands, a stern, serious guy, and on matters of, national security and when things are, when the shit hits the fan, people like that, right? People like that kind of figure, right? They might not want to go have a drink with him, down at the pub, but maybe they sleep a little bit better knowing that someone who doesn't have a life, is just this Autobot governing the country. So I think that has its pluses as well, right?
I was just thinking, well, who in Australian politics most closely resembles that description? And probably the closest that I can think of is like a Kevin Rudd. But but hang on, but Kevin Rudd was that. He was uninteresting, just the bureaucrat who could run things, wasn't particularly exciting, didn't have a life, but just, he'd just do it for you. But there was such like a cult around Kevin Rudd, like Kevin 07, like he was and he
I think he had miles ahead in terms of, like, Kevin Rudd embodied the sassy nerd, right?
But was he though? Like, was he really sassy? Like,
100%. Like, you get, if you got into an argument or went toe to toe or debated this guy, he's gonna tear you down. And I don't feel that the wordplay or the kind of turn of phrase or whatever would be as strong with someone like Dutton.
I mean, I think they play different characters, of course, but I'm just trying to think like what. Okay, so let's say Howard. Well, Howard was endearing as like a strong leader, you know, who'd been around for a long time, very experienced, like the wise sort of figure.
Yeah.
Then you had, I mean, I'm sort of starting from Howard and not going before then, but like, you know, because Keating and Hawke were very charismatic people.
Yes.
Then you had Kevin Rudd, which we've just spoken about. Then he
didn't embody masculinity in the way that Dutton probably does.
Yeah, they're different. But like, then you compare it. Okay, Julia Gillard. Well, maybe she's like the female version of what we're talking about here. Tony Abbott was a culture warrior.
Yeah.
So I would.
He had some moves
in a way that Peter Dutton isn't. Even though Peter Dutton does come across as very right wing, I don't think he is innately a culture warrior in the same way as Tony Abbott was. Malcolm Turnbull.
Yeah.
And then Albanese. So, Scott Morrison. Maybe Scott Morrison. Maybe that's even like like Scott Morrison was a little bit more sort of, I don't know, like a little bit more sort of Bunnings, you know, esque. I don't know. It's like you can imagine Scott Morrison selling sausage sandwiches at the local Bunnings in a way that I can't imagine Peter Dutton doing it. Like he just reminds me of this guy who would just be awkward. Like, oh, what do I do now? I put the, like, you know, a bit like Bill Shorten eating the sausage sandwich from the middle rather than the.
I'm so hetero, I have to eat it from the middle.
but anyway, okay. Let's put that to one side. I do want to say one thing though, because I've seen a little bit of this, particularly from those on the left, who just want to like slag this guy off as like, oh, he's just like Australia's Donald Trump. That's just not true. Like, I think we've got to be really careful. Those on the left who want to draw those comparisons need to be really careful that they don't lose credibility for their shit analogies, because you can I'm totally happy for someone to be critical of the Liberal Party, the coalition, Peter Dutton, for like that's okay. There's reasons to have those views or whatever, as there is with the Labor Party, to be honest. So it's not like you can't have that criticism, but don't like conflate, you know, someone who is operating within the spectrum of the ordinary realms of Australian politics, albeit not the end of the spectrum that you're into, as being equivalent to Trump, because that underplays.
Yeah, that's
like that. Just much. It's just maintain your credibility. Be decent, be honest. Compare him to Tony Abbott, that's okay. But let's leave Trump out of it when it comes to Peter Dutton.
Yeah. Final remark on this particular question or statement about Dutton. I listened to the Mamma Mia podcast. The Mamma Mia network had both leaders on. So they had Albo and they had Dutton, and they did a bit of a piece on, you know, getting to know them and what they're going to do for women and all this business. And I actually think that, you know, Dutton does have a lot more to him, and I think we'll see a little bit more of that. I'm hoping to see a little bit more of that in the campaign, but like many of these figures that are typecast into a role or cornered from a brand perspective, they have a lot more to offer. You know, his story is quite an interesting story. He has strong opinions that have been informed by his experience in law enforcement and dealing with a whole range of things around you know, domestic violence calls and everything like that. And is actually, I came away from it thinking much more highly of him. And, you know, so I think that we'll see some of that in the next 5 weeks. Okay,
final subset of this question to you. Do you think he would make a good Prime Minister? So forget the fact that means Albanese's gone and we have a new government, but just the core question of, in a world where he is Prime Minister, like, what would you expect for it? Do you think he's got what it takes to be a good Prime Minister?
Yes, I think so. And I say that because what we need right now in terms of all the turmoil that's going on internationally is bland and boring. It is steadiness. It's about something that's very predictable, but also has a very strong core. And I think people need that. You know, that's a very, very settling thing for people to feel that the governance is under that motto, right? And I also think that he is someone that has the backing and the support of the party, right? There's not that kind of fractious nature. Well, maybe that's an ignorant statement, but I don't get the feeling that there are coups in the wing, you know, and people, detractors trying to disrupt this.
All right. Well, I think it's your turn to put me on the spot now.
All right. Talking about Malcolm Turnbull, I'm going to segue into something that I want to play for you as a bit of a reaction. And also my comment about the party behind him and no detractors.
What do you think? What sort of Prime Minister will Peter Dutton make if he wins?
I think that's something we should contemplate with dread.
Oh, really? Why is that? Why?
Well, he's a thug. And Peter's got one tune that he plays. I mean, and it's been all his political life, and that is division and animosity, generally targeted at immigrants. It is real. I couldn't think of anyone less suited to be Prime Minister of a multicultural society like Australia.
No Christmas card.
I mean, there's no point pulling my punches. It's an important question. I've given you an honest answer.
All right, so that little clip was from The Project, which is, little news, I would say a liberal-leaning news segment.
And just to be clear, by liberal, we should just be clear on our words here.
Progressive Alliance. Sorry, that is confusing for everyone overseas. Where Malcolm Turnbull, who's a ex-Prime Minister, being asked a question on Dutton, right? And that's he's stepping out there on the ledge. What do you think about those comments?
All right. Well, I think they're unfair, and obviously Malcolm Turnbull worked with him much. He does know him, right? Peter Dutton was a minister in his cabinet as when he was Prime Minister. I think I can't help but think though part of that comment is like a bite to the notion of like Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister, which will be the peak of his career, his life in terms of his status or whatever. And he can't handle the thought of like a little bloke from Brisbane who used to be a cop also having that same office as him. Like it's almost like, and in fact will probably be Prime Minister for longer than him if he wins, like this almost this cheapening of his office that Malcolm Turnbull, sees. Well, the Prime Minister, this is my thing. So it definitely gives me vibes of elite, like kind of that elitist sort of thing. I think he's probably, one of the challenges, like you talked before about the roles that people play, like, and he has played that tough border policy, all that stuff. Like he sort of went into that, like, and like most politicians, I think fill the voids that exist, right? So when politicians see, here's a little niche for me to occupy, here's a gap, that can be part of my brand. Like they meet the market. It's not the other way around. They don't do the Steve Jobs, I'm going to create the product so you know that before you even know you want it. Like they don't tend to do that. Probably the best politicians can do that, but most, like a Peter Dutton would have gone down that pathway because he saw that's what
open role.
That's his role. Like that's what he could play.
Call.
So maybe think back to Tony Abbott, right? When he first ran for opposition leader, everyone laughed. It was like this, oh my God, does like this guy, Tony Peopleskills Abbott, think that he's, he's fit to be, opposition leader? Like, who does this guy think he is? He's kidding himself, right? And he was very divisive, but you know what? He won the election. He won and he was Prime Minister. So I think these people who do play these like roles of like are good political calculators. Like they do know, like us kind of, plebs, we think, go for the middle, go for the center of politics. That's where all the votes are, la da da. But for time and time again, these people thread that needle. And what they actually realize, what they know that like us kind of inner city elites don't know is that the middle isn't where we think it is. The middle is actually where they're hunting, right? And they know that, and we don't, and that's why they win elections, and that's why Anthony Albanese looks like he's a 50-50 shot to be a one-term Prime Minister. So I think Malcolm Turnbull, lives on the Point Piper Peninsula. He's a very elite, well-connected person. I don't think this guy's in touch with mainstream Australia in the same kind of way as I think someone like Peter Dutton is. But it doesn't necessarily mean that like Malcolm Turnbull is wrong at the same time. So he may very well be a thug.
He certainly looks like one. More like a goon, I would say, not a thug, like the old world goon. Now, Malcolm. I mean, I think I've had my Malcolm Turnbull rants previously. I don't know whether they've been on air or off air. I can't remember. But I wouldn't trust Turnbull as far as I could throw him. I think he's just so caught up in all of his kind of illusions of grandeur that I think this is just a really unfair thing to throw out there to try to and not understand how this will influence the public, right? Like, I think that having a former prime minister give such a scathing review to pretty much say this guy is the least qualified person I can think of, right? It's scathing. And I just think it's very unfair. And people have to remember, which they don't, that obviously Dutton was, had a big role in the 2018 spill that impacted Turnbull, right? And this guy is salty as all hell. He's salty as a clam, right? Because he sees himself as superior in terms of intellect, style, everything compared to his peers. And at the end of the day, he still has trauma and cannot hack that he was turned on from his party not once but twice. Right? So I think it's like a poison chalice situation. And I think it's very unfair. Now, the funny thing is that I think that a lot of the stuff that, the core of what the complaint is against Dutton, which is this strong, insensitive stuff on immigration and border protection, I think that's going to play very well, actually, because that's back in favor. And with all this stuff in the USA about the border and all that kind of stuff, popular opinion or consensus, the tide's turned on that. And they realize, actually, Australia was right. We handled that well when we had to turn back the boats and all that kind of stuff. That actually is what you need to do to have a strong border. And there are certain levels of humane kind of end states that you reach.
Do you think?
So I don't think that's going to be as a noose around his neck at all.
Do you think a Dutton prime ministership will see Tony Abbott appointed Governor General?
No, I do not. Look, yeah, I mean that's a whole nother chat with Tony Abbott. But no, look, I think that actually, and there's a story around that I think, to your point, the left has overreached about how inhumane and how all those atrocities around border protection and dealing with immigrants and things like that. I think that it's one of those situations that the middle has shifted on that people actually do understand that it's more nuanced, and you do have to, and taking certain elements out of the general population, or being stricter, or having preventative measures or disincentives actually is a part of the strategy in dealing with these complex immigration and border protection policies.
I want to, sort of echo that, but like with a slightly different spin, just to say, when we look at like the political system we have here in Australia as a whole, so we pull it above the weeds of like who said what, who's like into immigrants, who's not, all that stuff, and just look at it at a system level. And of course, we're talking about democracy, but we're talking about a very specific Australian brand of democracy. And I think both sides of politics, whether you're on the left, on the right, whatever, need to embrace the other side and understand that the other side defines them as much as they define themselves, or you define yourself. So, and that you're part of like a double-sided coin, and you need the other side to make your side work. And in this context, I would say that the Labor Party, if it didn't have pressure from the opposition, and I'm not just talking about the Labor Party now, I'm talking about the Labor Party back during the Rudd-Gillard years, if it didn't have the opposition pulling it to the middle, we'd have a disaster. We would have internal forces within the Labor Party pushing it to the left on topics like border policy, and we would have the rest of Australia totally mistrusting government and mistrusting what the people in charge that they elect to represent them are doing. And we've avoided what's happened in America, where that's exactly what's happened. You've had the American people completely distrust government. We've avoided that because the coalition has tempered the Labor Party, and the Labor Party has tempered the coalition. And that is 100% a good thing. So you need people like Scary Peter Dutton, Scary Tony Abbott, who we all love to hate, to play these roles. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's switch it.
All right, next question. So, Roger, has the Albanese government made Australia a better place over the last 3 years?
It's a really tough to separate the Australian experience from the international experience in some ways, in terms of the feelings and so on. So I'm trying hard to think much more domestically. But I would say that it's been. I was going to initially, my gut feeling was to say it's been a really rough 3 years, but then I look at the years before that with COVID and everything like that, and all that business. But it's hard to see many standout achievements from the last 3 years that I can hang my hat to be totally honest with you. I mean, we're demarcated from crazy events, from the different wars that are going on in different theaters around the world, from Ukraine to the October the 7th conflict with Israel and the Gaza Strip, Israel and Gaza rather. And that has had a significant splashback into Australia, in terms of our, how active we have been in protesting and the demonstrations, and then, we've had the the failed voice referendum. So I'm trying to actually be fair and think of the positive things that the Labor government have put through that has impacted us. I mean, I guess you could say that we have economically finally got inflation under control. So I guess, we could probably call that out. But yeah, I'm struggling a little bit to find the big wins on our side.
I think the answer has to be no, because, I mean, again, like, if you ask me to name even one thing, like one achievement, it's pretty slim pickings. And I would say the stuff that they would say are their achievements, I would say is actually bad, like they're bad moves.
Yeah.
There's things they've done that have actually taken Australia back in terms of some various policy settings. They haven't really moved or even tried to move in the important kind of areas of reform that, we often all talk about. Yes, inflation has come back to within the RBA's target band.
Although we're in a
3
cost
years.
of living crisis.
Yeah, but I think that's not, they haven't done it. I just don't accept that they can claim credit for the pain that every Australian household has endured through high interest rates. And if you rents have gone up because of high interest rates. Like, that they can somehow say that that's an achievement. It's the flip side of, government expenditure has constrained their, in fact, the RBA's ability to bring inflation under control. So I think they've regressed things. They've taken certain policy areas that, at least to my politics, in the wrong direction. And I think they've not really achieved much in anywhere else. And that's the really negative view of the government. But I want to kind of then now take that hat off and actually let's be a bit more realistic, which is that the last 3 years have probably been the worst possible time to win a first-term government. So there's a lot of factors outside of their control. So I don't think it's fair. Even though I would stand by what I just said in terms of I don't think they've achieved anything or much. At the same time, I would also then say, yeah, but what were they going to achieve? They weren't going to. There's no money to deliver kind of typical Labor social policies, for example, that they would say, well, that's our bread and butter. They haven't been able to do that. The economic situation hasn't been their doing. They're not to blame for high inflation. So
surpluses?
What, in terms of delivering surpluses? Well, they haven't done anything to deliver the surpluses. They've just been the beneficiary of favourable terms of trade. So, and then as soon as they dissipate, as they have, we have deficits again. So, I don't count that.
Tax cuts for low income?
Well, they didn't really deliver the tax cuts all they did was rejig a tax package that already existed. So, and I don't think that was, we might say, there'd be lots of people who'd say, oh, that was a good move. It's probably a fair, just move, or it's good politics or whatever. But originally the idea was that, well, the economically at least, you punish people at the top tax bracket, and that's where the major disincentives to productivity are. So even though, but then so I don't even know if that's, there's lots of reasons not to like that, even though it probably is fair and just and certainly aligns with Labor principles. So, and just one final comment is, right now we're not talking about an ambitious agenda. They're not doing like Howard in 98, talking about we're going to take the GST to the next election, and we're going to do some proper reform. And it's very hard to reform. So I think you can kind of and it's not like the last decade of coalition governments have delivered reform of any substance, but like they're not like, if you ask me, well, what is Labor going to do in the next 3 years that they haven't already done? Like, I don't know. Like, it's almost like they're just planning to sit in their nice offices in Parliament House for another 3 years and go to like dinner events and stuff and fundraise. Like, what are they actually going to do?
Increase the ban on social media accounts from 16 down to 14?
Well, there's all these little like around the edges stuff. And by the way, we on that social media stuff, who led that? Lord Voldemort led that. So that wasn't a Labor Party thing. That was actually leadership from the other side of politics, and they had to like step in behind it. So, like, honestly, like am I just not paying attention? Like, give me like
all
what
right,
what are they doing? What are they going to do in the next 3 years? What are they promising other than more of the same?
No, I'm with you. I'm starting.
Well, it's not cutting through. So if you're a Labor Party strategist listening to this conversation, you're rattling off. What about this? What about that? Well, it's not cutting through. I don't know about it.
They've got to. I mean, they'll have to do the housing stuff, right? So,
what's the housing stuff? Like what?
Yeah, I mean, they what the target is? What, 50,000 new houses?
Yeah, but having a target, like, how are they going to deliver it? What are they doing where's the tax reform? Where's the, like, what are they doing? Like, because having a target, like, Bob Hawke said no child's going to live in poverty by 1990. Well, that failed, didn't it? So don't give me targets. Give me actions on how you're going to deliver on your targets. That's what I want to hear about.
What do you think about judging them on their brand around climate change too? Like, hasn't that been a bit of a flop?
Well, I was thinking about this the other week, and I was, one of the thoughts that went through my mind was action on climate change is such a like 2010s thing, right?
Because they have done things like they've
yeah, but they can't talk about it because people people don't like it. Doesn't resonate positively with people. So it's almost like you talk about and you catastrophize something so much. And then even though what they're talking about are impacts that are going to come in like 30, 40, 50, 100 years. So, but like people don't necessarily think of it that way. What they hear is like, the 2010s, starting with Al Gore right through to, all the subsequent, political interventions during that period from say late 2000s and the 2010s. And nothing's happened. Like we've had, I mean, that's not the time horizon where the stuff does happen, but like, people just feel like, oh, well, that was just another moral panic, or like a panic about something, right? And it reminded me of, remember that how like when we were growing up, like there seemed to be this panic about CFCs, right?
Yeah.
And how
the not that you would know it in the locker rooms of our school, spraying that lynx deodorant,
and the ozone layer, like, and I don't know, maybe they did like come together and have some good policy interventions to fix that problem, but it just seemed like one of these like panics that just went away and you go, oh, what the fuck was that about? And I just feel like that's happened or risks happening now with climate change.
It's definitely not top dog anymore. What about again? Like this is just throwing something out there. I'm trying to like get the last bit of the avocado off the husk. What about trade? What about relations with China? And obviously Scott Morrison and COVID times, there was some bit of damage there. China's lifted some export bans and things. Are we just? How do you think? Can we attribute any of that to diplomatic efforts on our part?
I think China is a lot more simple and less complex than that makes it sound. I think China really is a trade-off of like sovereignty versus like bending the knees versus sovereignty. Like it's like how much are we willing to like, kind of do what we need to do for the economic gains and say the right things and be the right sort of partner with them versus like, no, we're going to stand up for ourselves and protect what we see as our interests and so on and so forth. And we're not going to be afraid to, be ourselves. And I think the reason that things pivoted sort of in the early 2000s, those sort of 2010s, was because China changed. So China changed with Xi Jinping, and we had a period of very warm a warming of relationships with China from the period, say, post Tiananmen Square to like literally right up to, Hu Jintao and Xi Jinping. But China was going through a journey of opening up and integrating into the global economy and so on. And it's only from that period where they actually changed that we sort of started to say, well, hang on, like, is this who we need to sort of have entangled long-term interests with? So I think what the government's done currently with China is they've sort of said, well, all right, maybe we went too far in the other direction, so we'll just pare it back. But it's not like there was some like artful diplomacy that made that happen.
Yeah.
And maybe there was, I don't know. But I think there's a bit of bending the knee that's happened.
You got to move that wine, baby. All right. Let me hit you up with something else. So this is something that actually a point of view that I heard from one of my family friends who is quite religious. And they said to me that, remember the time when the church actively rallied against Julia Gillard, who was previous Australia's first female prime minister, who was not married and didn't have kids and was not religious either. She broke a lot of firsts in Australian politics, and the church actively campaigned against her for those reasons, that she wasn't a woman of the church, and she didn't have a family, wasn't even married, living in sin. Anthony Albanese also, at the time of being elected, he's just recently got married, was not married and has not received the same backlash. How do you explain it?
Well, I do think it's different because Anthony Albanese is a father. He was married. He was divorced. He entered Parliament married, or he was married for the majority of his parliamentary career, went through a divorce, found love again, as a mature person. I do think that's a different story. Plus, he's a bloke. That's a pretty big factor.
I think that's what she's kind of getting at.
But like a different story to, here's this woman who doesn't know that her life is worthless until she's married to a good, honest bloke and until she learns that she's not fit to be Prime Minister. That said, I do want to like cast a little bit of doubt on the premise of what you've just said. And I'm not trying to gaslight anyone who's picked this up, but like, I don't specifically, I don't think the bulk of the prejudice or bias against Julia Gillard was as overt as what you've just laid out. I think a lot of that probably came through more like kind of maybe hidden or implicit or beneath the surface, but not as explicit as all of our prime ministers need to be married with children and Christian.
I think you should read the Not Now, Not Ever book. For a view of a trip down memory lane of how bad the abuse against her was.
I really don't think most Australians cared less. Like I think if it honestly, like I would be really shocked if anything more than 1 in 100 voters. In fact, if there were 1 in 100 voters who are energised to oppose her, they wouldn't have been Labor voters probably to begin with. They would have been far kind of extreme people anyway. So they wouldn't have been voting for sort of left, in their views. So I'd be shocked if, like, I think it was a real thing in terms of her experiences, but like, I don't think it was a real thing in terms of like electorally. Like, I don't think it was a relevant factor. I think we were sort of relatively in a good place back then. Well, we were a lot more kind of modern, if you like, than we would have been, say, if it happened in the 60s or the 70s or whatever. Like, I think we'd kind of moved past this world of like, and she did win the election. Let's just be clear about that. Like, she was successful up until the point that she said there would be no carbon tax under a government that I lead.
The carbon tax has killed many a career. Okay, let me hit you up with something. I tried to actually engage a little bit of field research in preparing for this episode, talking to a few people, and one that came out really that made me laugh a little bit was this one. So they said, "Why is Australian politics so boring? I don't know who anyone is. They all just seem so ugly and unremarkable." Honestly, though, why should I care, especially if I don't live in a marginal seat?
I think the best asset of Australian politics is that it is boring. Like, honestly, that is that's actually a good place for it to be because
feature, not a bug.
you do not want your system of politics to be a soap opera, because soap operas tend to produce bad ideas and stunts and things like that. Or the people who can succeed in a soap opera tend to be not necessarily the best, leaders. Or maybe they're like charismatic leaders, but they're not good, leaders of the country kind of thing. I honestly think if you went up to some random person and you said, who is Angus Taylor? Now, Angus Taylor is probably the second most important person in the opposition, and by kind of extension could be the second most important or powerful politician in the country in 5 weeks' time. Yet the majority of the population don't know who he is. Yet I bet they know who the Secretary of Defense in the United States is. Like, so you've got all of these weird, kind of oddities, and I think it's probably a good thing, but why should I care, even if you live in a marginal seat? Well, I don't know. I think if you don't care, then that probably means a lot of other people don't care. And at the same time, I don't think that's necessarily a healthy place to be.
Yeah.
I think you should care. Like, I think we have a duty to one another, like civics, to understand the world we live in, to understand politics, to know when you're voting, what you're voting for, who you're voting for, what they represent, what they stand for. Like that, I think you've got to see that as your duty. And if you want to live in a great country, then pull your finger out your ass and watch the 7:30 report once a month.
I struggle with this one. Not so much the whole Australians' politics is boring and ugly, although it does kind of test our limits of that attract people rise to the top. But I would say that, like your comment around Angus Taylor, right? So I think this is also the thing, these people in opposition. So Shadow Treasurer, right? He's got the second most important job in the world, but only once he wins, right? Sorry, not in the world, in Australia. But only once they win. Otherwise, they go back to just being the opposition. And, I think that it's like that thing on The Simpsons where Homer goes to Lisa, that's why we elect politicians and bureaucrats, so we don't have to think. And then she goes, but what about, it's like, oh, there you go, you're thinking again. Part of me does wonder that is the sign of a healthy, well-run government the fact that you have slightly disengaged people because they don't think they trust, right? And where do you have that line between disengaged and therefore your democracy is a little bit is in danger versus actually, no, this is a sign of like really trustworthy institutions, that people aren't worrying about these things.
I think we're a little bit different as well. One thing we didn't mention earlier was we have compulsory voting here in Australia. So it's not like in other countries where there's this big dynamic around bringing out your base, right? Where you've got to be really kind of interesting to your core people, because that core, group of core people that like they've got to come out and not only vote for you, but they've also got to donate to your campaign, and they've got to get out and hand like how to vote cards and things like that. And if you don't have boots on the ground, you're struggling. Like in Australia, that's not how it works. Like everybody has to go, otherwise you get a fine. And so in some respects, if you have, let's say you have genuine noise among, like, let's say even just 50% of the population. And by noise, what I mean is like people who are completely just going in to not get a fine, right? And they're not paying attention. They don't have views. They're not ideological. They're not pattern voters, or, they're just avoiding a fine. That 50% should kind of break sort of proportionally to the candidates. And, so 50-50 sort of either way, right? So as long as you've got like a big enough cohort of people who are engaged and can do that, play that sort of role on behalf of everybody else, then maybe it is okay. But what you in the same way as like in say the stock market, it's like, ETFs are great, right? But like ETFs kind of leverage off the fact that there are some people engaging in like, hey, which stocks like
speculative,
are going to be like actually are really worth, so that then the ETFs, can allocate their portfolio according to, like, they're kind of piggybacking on the work of everybody else. And that's a little bit the same here with politics. So I don't think we're anywhere near close to that threshold, but I just think like, just don't be lazy. Like, just pay attention, like be part of the community, just follow it, like understand it. I just think that's part of being an Australian, like, is to engage in Australia. And like, I think politics is part of that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that they don't make it easy because, like you said, the compulsory voting doesn't really gear you up to spending a lot of time and effort on marketing it all, right? Like it becomes a little bit harder to do that. And yeah, there's a lot of really, really uninformed voting that probably goes on in Australia. But does that really matter in the grand scheme of things? If you have all those other ingredients, probably not.
You know, of course, the other risk is people are sort of uninformed, but they think they're informed, and they sort of gravitate to the, like, I don't know, the TikTok view of politics, and, you know, they get, I don't know, down one sort of rabbit warren and they become like a culture warrior because the algorithm turns them into one, right? And they become very ideological very quickly on whatever issue it is, but they don't really truly understand deeply, like, the issue. But, you know, when it comes to voting, they want to have that moment of, like, validation. So we can be a little bit susceptible to that, but I think we're at the same time less susceptible than voluntary voting regimes, because it's the voluntary voting regimes that, like, it takes, like, energized or, like, really activated people to come out and vote, and they really activated people tend to be ideological people. So, you know, we're I think in some ways moderated from that, or we have more protection from that than other democracies.
So what do you think about the concept if they got rid of fines? What do you think would happen?
I think we're trained to vote, and I think we almost enjoy voting now. Like,
because I'm really opposed to the fines, actually.
So a lot of people in other countries, like, there's a very ideological kind of, or like almost like a, what do you mean they fine you if you don't vote or whatever?
They have really strong opinions of that in the States, right? There's like, this sounds like the very definition of oppression. If you forcing people by fining them to vote on something that they don't care about.
But can I just say, like, okay, if there were no, let me just ask you up front, right? If there were no fines, would you vote?
This is tough because I wouldn't vote in local elections, because I wouldn't always vote in local elections, or where, particularly in my seat that's just so safe as houses, blue ribbon, I wouldn't do that.
See, I take a different view. Like, I mean, I've obviously got to take you as a data point here that sort of proves me wrong, because you're a pretty engaged person, and if you're sort of expressing, and I don't know if it's just that you're so rational that you know that your vote doesn't count, so you wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But like, I do think, like, the community is charged in a way that you rarely see here in Australia. So anyone from another country listening to this, can I just, like, stress the point of just how exciting election day here is in Australia? Because it's like this community moment. All of the schools are running their fundraising activities because that's where you go to vote. It's this, like, the sausage sandwich, they call it the democracy sausage. You get, like, you know, sausage on a roll or a, like, piece of white bread, and it's fundraising, and it's like people, you get all the people with their hands, like, how to vote cards, and you get to have
say local election, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Okay, but fair enough. But, like, you get people with it, like, you can have an argument with the, you know, the people on the other side, like, just for shits and giggles. Like, it's fun. Like, I think it's a fun day. Like, it really is. And maybe that's just me, like, being, like, a bit, like, nerdy or whatever, but I do think I think it does more than it's like one of those ones where it's, like, greater than the sum of its parts. Like,
yeah, look, I just don't believe, I agree with you. I think that it's important, and we are trained to vote, and it's part of the culture, and people see it as a, you know, a privilege. But I just don't think that you also need to fine people.
Okay, like, let's throw it, like, the other, like, open it and reverse it, right? If you said to me, should we have compulsory voting? I would say absolutely yes. I love it. Yeah. I think it's great.
I agree.
And I kind of think you can't really have compulsory voting without consequence. Like, it doesn't.
Don't
really
you think
work.
that the people, like, I just think if people really, those people that will be fined are the ones that are usually a combination of disengaged or disorganized, or they don't, you know, have their shit together or whatever, or they've got carers duties and things like that. And I just think for those, that little drop in the ocean, I don't think is like a slippery slope argument for all the reasons that you've spoken about. I think it would slip away. And I think there's probably a lot of people who would be like, it's all right if I don't vote. Like, it's okay. Like, it doesn't work for them on that day or whatever.
it's okay. Like, I'll just not vote this time. I'm not. It's not like, I think the threat of a fine does like slap. It's. Do you know what it's like? It's like, I'm gonna give you like the perfect analogy, right? I think it's like paying for public transport. It's like, if you didn't have those, I think what you're saying is like, yes, you should tap on, but we're not going to have that physical gate to stop you, and we're not going to have people like checking. So it's just honestly the honesty system. And I can tell you overnight, if you got rid of the gates on public transport, fare revenue would drop by like
but how much
75%.
75? No way.
Well, I don't know.
That's
at
like
least 20%.
That's like grandmas and stuff getting
at least 20% though. Come on, give me that.
Okay, yeah. Look, but again, traveling on a shitty train it's not the same as.
Well, some might say it's quite similar.
Anyway, okay.
Australian democracy.
Let's go.
All right. So, Roger, a record low number of Australians are set to vote for a major party in this upcoming election. Is this a problem?
The only problem with this, so the short answer is no, but the problem that could be seeding, so to speak, is that it suggests to me that we in Australia are susceptible more to this tribal identity style kind of politics. And maybe that's too much of a leap, but that's kind of what I think is going on. And I don't know if we should import that as that kind of that style of tribalism in here. Like, that's something that we should try to rally against a little bit. But no, I don't think it's if some inner city dude once feels better about their vote because there's a teal candidate that gives them a little bit more of a taste of their priorities, then I also think that that's democracy in action, and that's a person's right? And if you can have as many kids as you can spoil, so to speak.
So I think Roger was referring to by the Teals, like this group of independents that won quite a few seats at the last election, and they're actually not like, they're called the Teals, but they're not like part of like another party, like a third force in politics. They're notionally like all independent, separate. They called them Teals collectively because they all like have similar qualities. So one, they were mostly all women. In fact, they were all women. Always, or at least the cohort that came in the last election, they ran in seats held by the Liberal Party. So, kind of the Tory Party, and particularly sort of more affluent areas. And they did run under kind of similar branding because they were all sort of funded under this like Climate 200 group. And so they tended to be more environmental sort of oriented. But like, we also have a Green Party who is legit like a party, the Greens. So they're environmentally minded, but they also they're there to look out for the interests of, these Tory electorates, right? So they're not quite as, sort of, I don't know, alternative as the Greens. But like one concern
they're less Woodstock, more Davos.
Yeah. But they're kind of like, they're described as like post-capitalist. So, and by post-capitalist, I guess what that sort of refers to is that they're so affluent that they don't care about capitalism anymore. Like, they don't care about the price of eggs because they're so fucking rich they could pay $100 for a dozen eggs, so they don't care about opportunity and, cost of living and things like that in the same way as like a suburban household would. So anyway, but that's an interlude on the Teals. But like, look, I think the concern isn't like independence per se. Like, I don't think there's some kind of core health in Australian democracy that like major parties, sort of account for a large share of the vote. But I think it's like a symptom of like a broader problem, which is that people aren't doing what they used to do, which is identify in broad terms that they're coalition or Liberal or Labor or whatever. And that's who I am, and that's like how I vote. And then they stick to that, for the rest of their lives and identify with that kind of broad, view of the world. But they're now increasingly like reactive to whatever the latest issue of the day is. And it sets up this dynamic where the major parties have to chase. It's like playing whack-a-mole, right? They've got to like meet the market. They've got to meet voters on the issues that they want. And so it's like this classic thing of like the message that works in like southeast Queensland is the same message that works in Melbourne and works in Sydney and works in, Western New South Wales or whatever.
Yeah.
That would have been the case 30 years ago, but it's not the case now. And so you have these, like, just people kind of expecting, and then major parties can't do anything because they're just like stuck. They can't rely on a majority to do things, proper things, like good reform. Like, they can't do it. It's killed it because there's always going to be some like independent that's going to come in and have the populist lines.
So that's what I meant about my comments around that. And, you know, we saw that a little bit with the Kamala campaigning too, right? Like, I think the other thing that's impacting that strategy, like that media strategy, is that when you do try to tailor it, you know, from Louisiana to Miami or whatever, there's too much online stuff now where you just see it as fake. You know, you get called out. So
Kamala does have guns, don't you know?
She's actually fired that gun before at a range. All right, let's pop on to the next one. Does Anthony Albanese need to be held more personally responsible for his failures with the voice referendum, the real damage that's been done to the community, and the leadership around reconciliation?
That is very much the low point of his prime ministership, and I think he's basically killed any chance of like. Can we just say it was like really poorly managed? Like, and so there's like part of this where you could say, well, it was a bad idea to begin with, so it was always destined to fail. But like, even aside from that, the way he did it and the way he handled it, like, you could not, like, honestly, like, let's be clear, like, you could not have done a worse job, like, in terms of, like, bringing people along with you and making the case for it and so on. So, and I think they lost already a lot. Like, I think what they lost out of it was a lot of momentum, a lot of airtime, a lot of, you know, narrative, like, and it made them look a bit impotent, let's be honest. So I think they probably have been held accountable already. And I don't think people are talking about it now, so maybe he won't at the election, but I don't know. I just don't like this. I just as another comment, and it's maybe like related, but not exactly. So I just don't like this whole, I'm Anthony Albanese. I'm the guy who, you know, I grew up in public housing. I'm a salt of the earth character. Like, fuck that. Like, this guy's a multimillionaire. He's bought his clifftop mansion, you know, on the coast. He's been in politics for, like, this guy's as elite as, he's a fucking prime minister. This guy is as elite as it comes, right?
He did admit to not knowing the price of milk.
So let's just kind of, can we just move past that? Like, and just like this guy now, like, yeah, I don't want to hear this, like, and look, I'm a South Sydney Rabbitohs supporter, and I kind of always had a bit of a soft spot for Anthony Albanese because he's also a South Sydney Rabbitohs supporter. But I just can't stand politicians using using these, like, I'm not into that. So
I agree. I'm very allergic to it, and I always have been. And I actually do not like. I'm probably one of the few people that just really despise the whole Albo thing. I know that it's almost like an endearing thing to call him Albo, but yeah, it just turns me off. You know, I really don't like this idea of trying to, when I see these elites or career politicians just kind of try to be of the people, or try to kind of, it's like hoodwink people into thinking that they're just the guy next door. And it really turns me off. I think going back to the voice, though, I just think that you are right. Like, a loss is its own. You know, it's kind of like a hangover is its own punishment for a night out. But I don't think that's enough for me. I think that actually this show just really poor leadership. I think that they really needed to find a better way to do it, and they needed to have one eye on the inevitable outcome and the impact to the community. Like, I think it's a bit of a stain. And it's set things back in a way that's quite unpalatable in the reconciliation journey, to the point where it's dead. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that most of Australia just moves on, and you're left with real damage to Indigenous communities and things, right?
So, can I ask, are you calling for a walk of atonement like Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones?
Well,
shame.
Definitely not topless for Albo. Definitely not. But yeah, like, I mean, I don't know if it's a good strategy for them to use the failures of The Voice. I don't think they will. But I just think that it showed, like you said, a little bit of impotent leadership. If they really cared about it, they could have tackled it in a different way. And I just think it's a symptom of it folds into this greater thing that the Labour Party are just, they're not good. They're not slick operators. They don't know how to kind of finish strong in these things. And yeah, I think that this one is a tough sell.
I just think it was like symptomatic of how out of touch they are. Like, because when Albanese,
right? It's either that they're thinking it's going to carry, like they think Australia is somewhere it's not, and all of these things point to poor judgment. And when they could have been responding to the data points, to what was going on, they just refused. They stuck their head in the sand. Yeah, and I think that's the problem, right?
Yeah, but Albanese, when he won the election, got up on election night, and it was Well, I don't want to kind of say literally spent half the speech talking about the voice, but a very significant chunk of his speech, a very prominent part of his victory speech, he was talking about the voice and delivering on the voice, and he was obviously talking to a Labour Party audience, so he was kind of giving them a lot more kind of weight in the speech than maybe a normal political speech. But that whole campaign, the voice and Indigenous reconciliation and all that stuff didn't feature like a whisper of the campaign. Like I in fact, and I remember watching it and going, what is this fucking voice thing he still keeps talking about? Maybe I'm just ignorant, or I was ignorant at the time, but like it just seemed like this hubris to kind of think that, we've won now, we're going to pursue all of these things, and to think that that's why they won, or like for him to have the hubris to kind of talk about that as though that was why they won the election, because Australians wanted the voice done and we're going to deliver it to them. Like, come on, wank on, it's like I just think it's like.
But what's even more like that's even more egregious to me is that he's kind of trying to attribute this moral clarity of going after the voice for the promises made to the Indigenous community, and at the same time he's like, I can't, I have to follow through, even if it's a moonshot. I've got to follow through because that's what I said I was going to do. And then on the other hand, he is asked outright, like plain as black and white, binary, of him passing on the stage 3 tax cuts, and then he goes and changes that, right, knowing that is something that historically people care a lot about heading into an election, and so he's banked the votes in that. And then he's changed it. So it kind of plays to this other narrative of like, and then he tried to spin it as, it was the brave thing to do because I made the tough choice to do the right thing. And it's like, well, no, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You banked those votes come election time where you said you would not change the stage 3 and you'd pass it on. And then you didn't, right? And I think that it shows this kind of view that no matter what you vote for, no matter what's promised by these bastards, that they're just going to revert to their party values at the end of the day. Right, and I think that's the thing that a lot of people feel, I think.
Yeah, I don't know that they always revert to their party values. I think the party values have become a lot more blurred. Like, I think there were quite clear party values, but you've got people from the coalition / Liberal Party / probably the National Party is still pretty true to their core party values. But like, I think maybe like.
An alligator kills a person every 30 minutes in the
I think I've observed a lot more kind of blurring of the lines. So you have Labor Party people doing like, do you know what they do the same thing like in government. So once they're in government, you probably can't distinguish that greatly between the decisions like a Liberal Party politician and a Labor Party politician would make in the same circumstance. They just they're usually shit scared to do anything bold, so they just go with like, what's the default thing to do here? And they kind of lose sight of often they lose sight of their true values. So I actually think in some ways that it could be good if we had a little bit more like party values inserted, because then we might actually see them like try to do something. Like they might go for some reform, or they might say, hey, we want to make a difference. Like, and I'd rather in some ways, like, I don't know, as I get older, I'm a little bit more open to the idea of just don't change anything, like, if it works. But like at the same time, if we're calling out for reform, maybe it's worth like copying like some reform in the direction you don't like, so you can get some reform in the direction you do like. I don't know. Can we play like, yeah?
Isn't that funny? Because like on Yellowstone, obviously you've got Dutton. It's the Dutton family ranch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's in that series he runs for for office, and he says, "I'm the anti-progress candidate." So that maybe there's some good alignment there.
Yeah. Do you know who I must admit, I don't tend to really follow Canadian politics, but I tell you what, I'd love to have like a Mark Carney. Like, just like, he seems like the real deal. Like, he seems like he fucking would be an amazing prime minister. I mean, he is prime minister, but like, subject to the election.
I thought you had a distrust of bankers.
Yeah, but he was the former, governor of the Bank of England and Bank of Canada, so can't be all that bad. All right, so who's going to win?
My vote is on the coalition, and that's mainly because of, I think we've painted a pretty bleak picture, I think. We had a bit of praise for the government procedures and the spirit of government in Australia, but I think we've painted a pretty bleak picture for both parties. And for that reason, I also think that the coalition will win because, all across the world, incumbents are struggling to get past that first term, people getting dissatisfied at faster rates, and they just kick people out. So actually, my money's on Dutton being the next Prime Minister.
Well, speaking of money and your money being, so the odds are, at least when I check them, with $1.90 each, so completely even. So 50-50 for both sides of politics. Part of me just feels like is struggling with this idea that a first-term government could lose. And I'm saying that not just in the context of just that a first-term government could lose, but also there's still quite a lot of ground to make up in terms of seats that the coalition need to win. But at the same time, they didn't get completely smashed at the last election in the way that other first-term, or at least incumbent governments, when there's a change of government, have been. If you just look at it through the lens of coalition versus Labor Party, is the coalition more or less attractive than it was under Scott Morrison during COVID? You can imagine a scenario where, they've just neutralized all of the things that everyone hated them for. And now some of those things are now on, people hate Labor for. So it's kind of, you can imagine that it could flip to them, but I don't know. I just don't believe it. Maybe, but at the same time, I know what you mean. They got to make up 12 extra seats or something like that, right? Yeah, but I wouldn't be shocked. I think the thing is, if they win, if the coalition win, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be in any way surprised. It's just that I don't think the odds, the even odds, to me, I think if you want to make some money, I'd be putting money on Labor, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Well, let's see how the odds track over the next little while. And I'm interested to see about the campaigns too. What do you think are going to be the attack lines? I think the Labor slogan's going to be something like, vote Labor, we've almost figured out whose fault it is.
What would be a good rhyming one for Albo?
Albo delivers, terms and conditions apply. Stronger, fairer, slower.
I don't think that one's good.
All right, well, we'll see what happens, and we'll check back in again closer to the date and maybe after the election.
Live from Bunnings Sausage.
Catch you later.